So what I'm going to be diving into today is this cycle of overwhelm. Okay. This is if you feel like you're in this place where everything's a mess, you're overwhelmed, you don't know what to do. It's highly likely that this is happening. So I'm just going to switch over to this spot right here. I like drawing things. I like visuals. And so I would imagine that some people like this stuff too. Okay. So what we're looking at is this big cycle of overwhelm. Overwhelm. And it just goes in circles. We just get overwhelmed. We don't do anything. Get overwhelmed. We don't do anything. Okay. So this is kind of how it happens. So we start out in a place where we have a plan. There's a plan. These are the things that I'm going to be doing. Now, once we have that plan in place, we have our action steps, right? And it gets to the point where we eventually hit a point of execution doing the thing, and we start to feel like we're not doing enough, okay? We're in plan phase, we're in execution phase, then we get down to this point, not doing enough. Not enough. I feel like I'm supposed to be doing all of this stuff. I'm supposed to be making all of this progress, and it's not happening. So the reason must be that I'm not doing enough stuff in this place of execution. I'm not doing enough stuff there in order to make the progress. So what do I need to do in order to do that? We add stuff. We're in this place where we've got a plan. We've got all the things that we're supposed to do. We start executing on it. We hit to that point where we feel like we're not doing enough, and we add stuff so that we can compensate for that feeling of inadequacy or that we're not doing enough. Funny part is we've already got the stuff that we're not doing enough of, right? We've already got the stuff we're not doing enough of. And then we add more stuff to it. And so naturally, what happens next is overwhelm. Got more shit than we know what to do with. And now it's like, and you get frozen, you get paralyzed in this place of overwhelm. This is when we hit that actual overwhelm. Got a plan. We start executing. We realize we're not doing enough because we're not making the progress that we want to make. We start adding stuff, and then we hit overwhelm because we have more stuff to do than we have the bandwidth to actually accomplish. So then this is what happens next. After we hit that place of overwhelm, we get fatigue. There's so much stuff running around in our brain that we don't have the bandwidth to keep up with, that we get tired just thinking about it because there's so much stuff going on in our head, okay? I'm gonna pull this back all the way from the beginning so we can, the more times you see this, the easier it's gonna be to follow, okay? So we start at the place where we have a plan. There's an outcome that I want. This is the plan that I have to achieve it. I hit this place where I start implementing the plan, execution. I don't see the results that I'm looking for, so I feel like I'm not doing enough. To compensate for that feeling of inadequacy of not doing enough, I add more stuff for me to do so that I feel like I'm actually, starting to make progress. And then we hit this place of overwhelm because we have more stuff on our plate than we have bandwidth to execute. And then we hit fatigue because we spend all of our energy just thinking about the stuff that we have to do, that we don't have any energy left over. So then once we hit that fatigue, then typically what happens is we do nothing. This is like if you get caught in that cycle of overwhelm. You hit fatigue, you do nothing. And then you get to the point where you say, okay, I'm not doing anything. I'm doing nothing. Okay, so I need to create a new plan because doing nothing is not acceptable. I have to do something. So let me start over. I'm going to create a plan. Now that I have a plan, I'm going to start executing that plan. Now that I'm executing that plan, I get to this point where it's like, I don't feel like I'm doing enough. I feel like I should be doing more. I feel like I'm not enough in some capacity. Okay, let me add more stuff for me to do. Now I have too much stuff and I'm overwhelmed. I'm tired and I don't want to do anything. And the cycle just repeats itself over and over and over and over again. So what's the fix? The key thing here, when we look at the fix for this problem, the overwhelm, is we try to look for the critical point, okay? The critical point is the point where the smallest change can carry the greatest impact. So if we look at this and we identify if we're going to change something, right? The first thing that we have to look at is where in the process can change happen. It can happen in this phase right here between planning and execution. It can happen between execution and feeling like you're not enough. It can feel like it can come in the place of not enough and adding stuff. These are all different places in the system where change can happen, right? This is a cycle. It's a system. It's predictable. So when we start to look at where can we make the change? Well, if we look at this place where we get to overwhelm and fatigue, well, we're already overwhelmed. So it's like past the point of no return. There's nothing we can do. The only place after overwhelm is to go back to create a new plan. That's pretty much the only place. One, you can backtrack it and you can undo it, but ultimately it's going to come back to creating a new plan. I've hit a point of overwhelm. I have to reorganize. I have to reprioritize. I have to clarify. I have to create a new direction. All of that stuff, it comes back to creating a new plan. Right? So we don't want to let it get that far. We do not want it to get to the point of overwhelm in this cycle. I'm going to pause this. I see some comments rolling in for this, and I want to read them real quick. Joyce seems may feel like routine can be such a buzzkill, so I try to figure out when I have the most fun doing and at what point does it create tension and resistance. That's true. Routine can be a buzzkill, but it can also be your best friend because humans are creatures of nature, creatures of habit. In nature. But yes, routine can be a buzzkill, but if you learn how to implement it in the right places, at the right times, and be judicious with how you implement routine, it can actually really make a big difference. I get that thing of routine because I don't like having like overstructured, highly routinized like existence. It's not the way that I function best. I need to have like a little more flow. And so ultimately the conversation about routine and where it belongs in one's own life is something where it is like what works best for you. Some people need highly structured down to the 15-minute increment of what's going on. Some people, that becomes overwhelming, right? I mean, you look at a calendar that is stacked, it's like, holy shit, and there's just so much stuff. So routine is definitely one of those things where it can be your best friend or your worst enemy, depending on how you use it relative to your own experience. So I digress. Let's dive back into this, okay? So we've got this cycle of overwhelm, right? We make a plan, we start executing, we realize that we think or we feel that we're not doing enough, we add more stuff, we feel overwhelmed, we get tired, and we do nothing. And then eventually we start a new plan because doing nothing is not an option, especially if you run a business. Because if you do nothing in your business, then you go out of business and you no longer have a business, and that's a problem. So we don't want to let that happen. We don't want that to happen, okay? So we're looking at this place. Where do we create change? Where is the critical point where we can make a shift that's going to ultimately avoid the place of overwhelm, okay? This is not an ideal place between plan and execution because, as Mike Tyson says, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. It's true. It's true. Like, you can have the best plan in the whole world, but when you get punched in the face, you get a curveball, something doesn't line up, then eventually you're going to have to compensate that. If you create a new plan every time you get a curveball in the place of, starting to execute or after execution, if you start to create a plan, you're never really going to get to the point of, getting stuff done because every time there's a curveball, you reset. Not going to make progress that way, okay? I'm just going to tell you right here, the key points right here, these are the 2 points. Once you hit the point where you're adding stuff and you're getting into overwhelm, you can start to subtract stuff, but ultimately subtracting stuff right here involves reprioritization, getting clarity about what's important, what matters most, organization, all that stuff, which ultimately leads you back to creating a new plan, which is better than getting all the way to this place where we're doing nothing. We have to create a new plan, but still we get to this point where we have to circle back to the plan. So ultimately we want to cut this off. We want to cut off this cycle of overwhelm at some point before we start adding stuff, okay? Because overwhelm happens because we have more than we can take care of. We have too much stuff on our plate. And this is why goal setting in a certain aspect can be helpful with saying, I want to do this and have it achieved by this amount of time. So at least you have some sort of boundary of this is what I'm working on. This is when I'm working on it. It doesn't have to be, routinized, whatever. It doesn't have to be placed into a routine, every 15 minutes for the day, but to say this week, I'm going to focus on working on my book and building out the structure for my offer. Those are the two things that I'm going to work on this week. So we put boundaries around what we're going to work on and when we're going to work on it. And then that stops us from hitting that place of let me add stuff, because it's like, no, I said, this is the stuff that I'm going to work on for this period of time. So I'm going to work on that stuff for this period of time. Then after that can reassess. Because ultimately, if you start working on all this stuff, it's like, I'm going to add something. I get overwhelmed. I get fatigued. I do nothing. And then the whole plan is shot anyway. Okay. So ultimately, we want to avoid having that happen. So if you are in a place of overwhelm, right? If you are currently right now in a place of overwhelm, that means that you are existing in this space right here, right? Overwhelm, fatigue, doing nothing. Okay. Now, one of the funny things about this is it can actually get even a little more sinister. We're going to cut out this plan and execution, and we're going to circle this whole part here in orange, right? So let's build this out even more. This is going to be fun. So we're in this place, feel like not doing enough, not enough. Sorry, my handwriting is ass today. So not enough, right? So the next thing that comes up is we add stuff. And then after we add stuff, we hit overwhelm. And then what happens, we get overwhelm and then do fatigue, doing nothing, fatigue/nothing. And then this is where it gets really fun. We go from fatigue and doing nothing. This part right here ends up circling all the way back to not doing enough. Maybe you've seen this. This is the downward spiral, okay? This is when the train can really go off tracks. Feel like you're not doing enough. Then you add stuff. After you add stuff, you feel overwhelmed. And when you feel overwhelmed, you feel fatigue and you start like doing nothing or doing less. And because you feel like you're doing less, then you feel like you're not doing enough. You add more stuff, you get overwhelmed, you get tired, you don't feel like you're doing enough. You add stuff, you get overwhelmed. And just like that little cycle is what can happen right up here. And I'm just like drawing all sorts of stuff all over the place. At any rate, we're in this space right here. We've already hit overwhelm, okay? Accept that it is time to prioritize and organize and reprioritize and really get clarity on what matters. Because at this point, like it really doesn't matter what you do. It's going to come back to this place of having a plan. It's like, okay, I need to reorganize, need to reprioritize, need to figure out what I'm going to do next. Otherwise, you're in a place of like reactive putting out fires, just trying to fix symptoms of overwhelm, right? If you get stuck in that place or overwhelm, fatigue, doing nothing, not doing enough, add stuff, overwhelm, fatigue, then you're treating symptoms. You're treating symptoms, and ultimately that's not going to resolve the problem. It's a Band-Aid, okay? If you are here, it is time to create a new plan, start executing, and then ideally have something in place. So if you hit one of these points here, you know that that's where the weak spot is, right? The weak spot is I'm either going to get to a point where I feel like I'm not doing enough, or I'm going to get to the point where I start adding stuff because I feel like I'm not doing enough. Ideally, we cut ourselves off right here. We don't allow yourself to get to the place where you feel like you're not doing enough, because ultimately it's going to start that overwhelm cycle, okay? Now, there's a caveat to this. Let me pause for a second. One of the things that can happen is when you hit this place right here, am I doing enough or am I not doing enough? What this comes back to is, am I actually following the plan? Am I executing on the plan? Okay? Because if you've got the plan, but your execution is lackluster and underwhelming, then you're not doing enough, sure, but it's not because of the elements that you're working on. It's just the time and effort that you're putting into the plan and execution are not adequate or like what is required for actually getting the results from executing on the plan. So when you create this new plan, you start executing and you know that you're supposed to be looking out. I know I've just got all sorts of colored lines all over the place. Looking out for that spot right there so that we don't get to that feeling of not enough. I'm not doing enough. I don't have enough things on my plate. You start saying, how can I do what I'm already working on better? Okay. How can I do what I'm already doing better? Not how can I do more, but how can I do better? Okay. Because ultimately, if you look in how can I do more, it gets into this place of adding stuff, which is not what we want. We don't want to go there either. Ideally, we don't want to go here. This is the no-go zone. We don't want to hang around in not enough land because ultimately it's the thing that will lead into the downward spiral of all of this mind garbage, which is that downward cycle of not doing enough. Then I'm gonna add stuff, and I'm gonna feel overwhelmed and fatigue and doing nothing. Then I'm not doing enough, and I'm adding stuff and overwhelmed. Like, just don't want to go there at all. Do not want to go there. So, I hope this was helpful. Let me go in and check out, see if there's any comments here I can look at. Let's see. So this is a really good one. I feel like doing better is a measure of inadequacy, though. So I'm trying to think about it in another way. I can see that. The way that I think about this, let me pull this. I'm going to draw something for you again. I've talked about this before and I will talk about it again. And this is when we talk about doing work. That's what we're looking at. Doing work. We're doing work. That I hate how crooked that line is. Doing work, okay? So we have in doing work, we have objectives. I'm just break this down. Objectives, the things that we want to complete, okay? So in order to complete those objectives, it takes an investment of effort. Now, the way that I see it, we have an investment of effort to complete the objectives, right? So this is a function of time and energy. So when we look at the idea of doing better, we could look at it from the sense of, we could look at doing better with quotations around it. Because here's the thing about language is ultimately to us, it can mean whatever it means to us, and what a certain piece of language means to us doesn't necessarily mean it's going to mean the same thing to someone else. So when we look at doing better, it can be one of two things. I mean, it can be one of many things, but for the sake of this, it's going to be an invest effort, which is a function of time and energy, or a rating of quality, right? So if we are looking at it from that standpoint, when we say the doing better can start to issue those feelings of inadequacy, to me, what that says is it's a rating of quality, okay? Am I doing a good enough job? Where the other way that it could be looked at is, am I investing enough effort into it? Right? Am I putting in the time and the energy that's required to meet the objective? Okay. Again, it's like doing better can mean so many different things, but within the context of not adding more stuff because we don't feel like we're doing enough in this context of overwhelm, by looking at it not from the point of quality, but from am I actually putting in the time, the hours? I'm just going to put this out there because it came to mind. So we've got time and then we've got skill. So when you're starting out, it takes a lot of time to execute a low level of skill because you have no idea what you're doing, right? And the higher your skill level, the less time it takes to actually execute it. The higher your skill level, the less time it takes. The lower your skill level, the more time it takes. So part of this is making sure that you're assessing your actual progression, okay? And part of this is like being able to identify the reverse gap of I'm doing so much better than I used to. I'm doing this faster than I used to. But again, when we look at the idea of doing better being from a place of am I putting in the effort that it takes to actually get the stuff done, okay? Because again, we go up to this whole shit show of lines and drawings for Overwhelm. When we hit this place of not enough, we can say that the quality isn't good enough, or we can say that I'm not putting in enough, effort, not investing the effort that's necessary. If it's something to the effect of looking at, I'm not doing enough things, I need to add more stuff, more things to work on. That's when we get in this place and it all cycles around. So that whole idea of getting better, ultimately, it comes down to how you think of doing better. Giving yourself grace and being compassionate with yourself, honestly, is a huge part of this. We like to expect a lot of ourselves. Even sometimes we tend to overestimate our own abilities just by nature. If you're someone that is geared towards being a high achiever and high performance, then feeling like you're not doing enough is, it kind of comes with the territory because you always want to be doing more. But ultimately, that can lead to having too much stuff on your plate, can get overwhelmed, you can get burnt out, you don't want to do anything, and it's actually going to be a detriment to your progress. So anyway, I know I didn't really plan on going into some of that other stuff, but it came up, so I figured I'd dive in. Anyway, I hope y'all got some value from this, and I will catch you later.